Welcome to Utah Stories. So one of the biggest problems we've run across concerning homelessness and affordable housing is we've got all these empty buildings, we've got all these empty lots. Only about 3 or 4% of Utah as a state is even occupied with humans. Why can't we build affordable housing? Why can't we fill these empty buildings with units that homeless people could fill up, or seniors who've been priced out of the market, or people who are young professionals who've also lost their jobs and found themselves on the streets? And it's been a question I've just been grappling with, trying to understand. And we have on the program with us Casey, tell me your name, McDonough.
Oh, yeah, McDonough.
You've run for city council, you're an architect. You've also concerned yourself with these issues and the ongoing homeless problem.
Yep.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Just to clarify, because I get this all the time, I'm actually not an architect. It implies that I'm licensed. I've just been working in architecture since I was 15.
You just play an architect
I play an architect on TV, exactly. I do all the things architects do, and then if I do need to have a stamp, I'll work under the supervision of an licensed architect. So
you're like the George Costanza.
I am like the George. Yes, I am exactly like George Costanza.
I'm just kidding. You're obviously.
I took it as a compliment. I like George.
Yeah. So when we look at like the public safety building downtown, and now we look at the empty Ramada that was the winter overflow two winters ago, why can't those empty buildings just be used for homeless?
It's interesting. I've looked at both those buildings when they've come up in the conversation. The city recently is saying, we're going to put the public safety building back into the RFP process. The Ramada Inn, I went and saw that when Rocky had his press conference. And both those buildings, I think part of the problem is that the city, when they think they're going to do something for themselves or they're going to hire somebody or get a developer to do it, they set the bar so high that it starts to become cost prohibitive. And it also pushes out getting anyone in those buildings out a long time because you have to do so much work.
Mm-hmm. It seems like they just decide, if we're going to do this, it's got to be completely renovated up to modern code.
Yeah, current
Everything's
code.
Got to be perfect.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, the homeless are happy to break in these buildings and try to just squat inside of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, they can't. Why can't they find some kind of middle ground?
And I've always, I've dealt with the city building department for a long time. I've actually dealt with the county health department before. And there's a certain kind of rigidity where they won't bend, right? They won't budge. It's like, no, this is what it says. What's interesting in both of those kind of courts is, for instance, the building department. The building official can make his own determinations or her own determinations and say, well, I'm going to make an exception here because it's not affecting life safety. Mm-hmm. And we need to make this happen, right? So, like on the public safety building, I don't know why that one's not already fixed up. They built that new building next door, Magnolia. Mm-hmm. That property also has a lot of open parking lot, which could be high-rise housing, the density that we keep hearing about. But I think the city kind of gets in its own way by saying, well, we can't do any of these unless they meet current code. Mm-hmm. You hear a similar thing that the Fleet Block, which is the city's block across from like Fisher Brewing. It's a whole city block.
That's like 800 South and Third West.
Third West, yeah. Those buildings, at one point I heard someone at the city say that they were dangerous. And what I wonder is they're saying that because they're like, well, it doesn't meet current code. Right, and it's not safe. It doesn't meet the current structural codes. And for me, I weigh, let's say, affordable housing specific to the homeless population, and even in that, it's just critical housing, right? Mm-hmm. Keeping them, giving them a place to go. You have to weigh the risk to their lives on the street and their limbs against the risk of an earthquake, which do happen. We had one happen recently, of a magnitude that would take a building down because it doesn't meet the current code, right? Mm-hmm. So whenever I see that building in particular, there's some RDA buildings across the street from there as well. I think, why aren't these being utilized for something? Mm-hmm. And again, I think it's because the city says, well, we have something much grander in store, and it's off into the future with blinders on to the kind of critical thing happening on the streets.
Yeah, which is nuts because I talked to a homeless woman one night, and she says, yeah, I'm an addict, and I do my best on the streets. I would love to be in housing. She said I even had a housing voucher, but I can't have a consistent caseworker, blah, blah, blah. But she's basically saying to me, if I'm freezing cold and I see a building and I think I can get in there, or my group of people who camp out on the streets think we can get in there and it's going to save our lives, who wouldn't do that? I mean, if you have no place to go to get warm and you're out on the street, how can you really come down on homeless people who have been told, the shelters are full, there's no more space. How can you say you can't do whatever you deem necessary to stay warm? And so it's like, why not have some safe houses? Even have people sign a waiver. Like, I understand this building is not up to code. And if there's an earthquake, it could fall down. I mean, that's better than freezing to death. And you'd think that they could come up with some middle ground there.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting. You said a waiver, and what came to mind was, I just think there's a strange kind of relationship with liability in the city, that there's somebody giving or taking advice that's like, well, if we do these things, then we're opening ourselves up to lawsuits.
That's probably it, right?
Right. And it's interesting because if you weigh that against, well, it doesn't seem like there's any consequences right now. So when someone freezes on the streets or loses a limb, or the homeless abatements, right? There's none of those people have the ability to sue anybody, right? They're just like, oh, I have to move on, right? Or I have to try to find a place to stay warm. And so the reality of that is there's no liability because nobody can sue anybody, right? I mean, I've heard criticisms about the ACLU, why they haven't gotten involved in abatements in those kinds of matters. And it does strike me as strange that they wouldn't at least make a statement of some kind. I don't think I've seen one. I don't know if you have, but and I like the ACLU. I think they do a lot of great things. It's similar to the city. The city is doing a lot of great things, but when the most vulnerable are being left to fend for themselves, and then on top of that, are being moved from place to place to place, and then they move back in because they have nowhere else to go. It feels like that maybe some of the priorities just aren't in the right place.
Well, to me, I mean, if I were to guess the best answer to why these empty buildings are not being utilized, it would be developers essentially run the city. They're the lion's share of all the campaign contributions come from developers. So the politicians are doing their bidding. They don't want to see the supply of housing necessarily increased. I mean, to have that monopoly on housing that the developers have, that keeps rents high, that keeps supply low. I mean, that would be my theory if maybe a year ago, but I think that might have something to do with it. But it just seems to me that nobody really wants to change the status quo. And
agreed.
And we were talking about abatements. Like, how could you defend abatement policy at this point? How could you say this policy we have in place where people go out, they try to find a place to camp, we're going to go in, raid them, take all their belongings, throw them in dumpsters, and we're going to do that every week. To me, that's a great recipe to drive a person to insanity. If you go out for a Coke and you come back, everything you own is gone. How could you not become insane after a while of that?
Yeah, agreed. Well, it's like mental health challenges as a consequence of being homeless and having all your belongings stolen and abatements, right? I heard a psychologist recently talking about why do people abuse drugs, right? Why do addicts become addicts? Because they're looking for something. They're looking for relief. They're looking for escape. And I can see why I would be like, I'm on the streets and they take my stuff and they take my stuff. Where can I go? The shelter. The shelter's full. Over and over. And then it's winter and I'm like, what do I do? And somebody's like, try this. And then I'm like, oh, for an hour I can be oblivious to this existence and I don't care about anything. I mean, there's all the reasons why people are camping and on the streets. I mean, there's a guy downtown, he has a dog and he has shared. He's like, well, if I go to these places, I can't take my dog. I hear the argument both sides of that kind of conclusion, which is, well, he shouldn't have a dog. He's homeless. He should try to find a place. And then you think, well, I mean, should anybody have a dog? We all have dogs for relatively the same reasons.
Well, you also think if you're sleeping on the streets, that dog is going to save your life.
It's
somebody's going to come and
it's
try
your
to
companion,
take all
and
your
it's
things.
why do we have emotional support animals? Because animals give us support and emotional support and well-being. You have somebody, right? You have your friend with you all the time, or you have couples, and they're like, well, we have beds at the shelter, but you guys got to split and go here and here. And then they tell stories about how the shelters aren't the safest place. I know another guy who's gotten off the streets, and it's such a challenge to stay in the housing that he's in and work a job. He has some criminal issues. He's on parole. He has to take, I think, 2 or 3 different P tests, drug tests, and they're random. And so he's like, I can't deal with all this. He's like, I think I might just go back into the woods and camp and be homeless again, because the system isn't supportive. It makes it almost immeasurably hard, the way he describes it, right? And so I support him as much as I can. I say, man, just keep going, because it does get better. I mean, I've had my challenges in life. Everybody has. Usually that's how it plays out. It gets better if you keep working at it. But there's something about the homeless issues in Salt Lake that don't feel like that's what's happening. The abatement after abatement.
Yeah, and it doesn't. I mean, I also don't know if this is true or not, but it almost feels like the mayor does have her hands tied, that she isn't the one in charge, that whoever got her elected is actually calling the shots. I've said that a few times off air, because I mean, I think what happens is people get elected and they get that taste of power, and then they realize they just want to keep that, and then they realize what they have to do to keep it, and it's to sacrifice everything that they stood for before they were elected.
And if they see a future, we'll say in any court, whether it's development or politics, that they're like, well, I can't shake too many boats or rattle too many fences, because then I might not get where I want to get. I would say, because our current Mayor McDonough, likes to talk a lot about cooperating with everybody, right? I have to work with the state, because otherwise they'll work against us. And we've all seen that happen in the past, where the state kind of pushes back on the city and the city pushes against the state. But what I think is interesting is, you commented on like who's really calling the shots, and if you're not disagreeing, and I think disagreeing in a public way when you think somebody's wrong, the people that are maybe controlling some of those purse strings have more control, right? No, we're cooperating. We're cooperating. It's interesting in that whole thought process right there. Is it Wayne Niederhauser, the state's homeless director?
State homeless coordinator.
I watched his TED Talk, and there's a huge conversation, I think, for them about housing first, as if just providing housing is going to solve the problem. Just providing more housing. It's the same with affordable housing. We'll tie that back in, because we kind of went down the homeless tangent a little bit. Affordable housing for the homeless, it's just a housing first equation. More housing, more housing, more housing. I talked to an economist who said, of course that's part of the equation, supply and demand. But if you think that's the only part of the equation for any economic decision, then it's an unwise perspective, because there's so many things, developer interests, whether you think they're shady or not, right? They have business interests. They want to build housing. They want to sell housing. They want to make a profit. Affordable housing is, I would think, would not be something that would make as much money as market rate housing. So does that drive them to do different things? The city says, well, we've got all these affordable units. They're 40%, 60%, 80% AMI. None of that to me seems truly affordable. It's not going to get the people off the street. It's not going to keep people from moving away that make minimum wage jobs. So
I'm trying to get a handle on it. What is preventing truly affordable housing from being built? Because we talked off air already, the zoning laws and the regulations, the codes. I mean, if you relaxed those two things right now, you'd have I'm sure market providing tons of affordable housing, because you could just take any empty lot and just put up tough sheds and insulate the tough sheds, and there's affordable housing. And it's like the homeless would be fine with that. I mean, I've talked to them. They don't say they need Magnolia place apartments with quartz countertops.
They need a warm place.
Balconies. They just want to keep their stuff secure till they can save up enough money from that first and last month's rent. and then they could get a good job.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are really skilled, I found. A lot of them are skilled mechanics or skilled carpenters who had a big, bad run of bad luck.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, I appreciate you coming on and talking about this, because it is, I think, the two number one and number two issues in our city right now. And I don't see anybody stepping up to the plate to solve these problems right now. So
I think it's I don't know how much time we have left.
we try to keep each segment to 10 or 15 minutes,
Okay,
but
perfect.
we can go over.
That's all right. I'll just a couple of closing thoughts then.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I always think in our system, you're trying to provide opportunity across the whole scale, socioeconomic scale. And recently it's becoming hard and hard. It's pushing the bottom up, right? Where more and more people are dropping out at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're homeless or you're making a minimum wage job, the lower middle class, it's harder and harder. Utah's, I think, one of the top 10 or top 5 most unaffordable housing markets.
Yeah.
And so when that happens, I feel like there's just a lack of being taken into something critical. It's like, no, we'll just drive the market. The market will drive it, and we'll throw in some lower than market rate housing in there. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. And it's not enough fast enough. Somebody said, the supply and demand thing. If that were the case, I often say New York would have the most affordable housing anywhere, because there's so much housing, but they'll never keep up with the demand, and that's what's happening here. The population's growing. We can't keep up with that demand. We got to find other ways to give more housing opportunity to people in the bottom, I'd say quarter or more of the social economic scale.
Yeah. It's like I had a guest on, Samuel Grenny, and he said the bottom rungs of the socioeconomic ladder have been wiped out.
Yeah.
So you're somehow supposed to go from the very bottom to like that fourth rung.
Yes, that's a great analogy.
And it's just impossible.
You can't get there.
You can't jump that high.
And so there's the people at the bottom, and they're just moving around like nowhere to go.
Mm-hmm.
And we're saying, well, just wait, it'll be fine. Just keep waiting.
Yeah.
And nothing's happening.
And unfortunately, the government is providing a fake ladder that just goes down.
Yeah.
Whereas the worse off you are, the more benefits they'll give you.
Yeah.
But it's only incentivized to move down. There's no incentive to move up.
Yeah, to move up.
And so you see these people out there, well, if I'm homeless another year or two, I'm going to get free housing.
Yeah.
My points will be high enough. I'll go to the top of that free housing line, and that's housing first policy right there.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, I talked to a caseworker on the phone about a guy that I talked to on Main Street, and he said it's like he runs up to a wall. There's certain things he can do, but then he's like, there's a point he gets to, and he's like, I can't do anything else. There's nothing else I can do to help this person get off the street, or to help this person get the care they need, or it's kind of like criminality driving treatment, right? Like the only way you're going to get treatment is if you get arrested. And then even that treatment, you wonder if it's really doing as much good, if it's treatment in a prison or a jail, if that even happens. There's just something at the bottom that's not working right, and it doesn't feel like, I'll even say our Salt Lake County, and the state is addressing it like it's a critical in-the-moment issue. It's like a 10, 20, 30-year plan for them. Mm-hmm. They're like, well, we'll get there, but we're not going to really pay attention to the emergency, because it's not, they keep saying
we got our 50 pods.
Yeah, we got our 50 pods.
That's a model that might work.
50 pods.
So if we start with 50, maybe we'll have another 50. And it's like, in the meantime, people are going to freeze to death this winter.
Even that is, we talked about code implications and liability. Mm-hmm. When they said a sanctioned camp, I think everyone thought the same thing. A designated place that's managed in a way that people can come set up their tents, that there's safety, that there's, services, that there's support, that there's restrooms, that there's showers. And so when they said, we're going to buy these pods, and my understanding is the pods are shipping containers split into two. I don't know if you've heard these details. And they're shipping in from elsewhere. Yeah. Shipping containers split in half with each half of the container is a little house.
Okay.
And they're going to ship those in and have 50 people, and they're each going to get their little half a container. And I thought it's some version of the little home village, right? Mm-hmm. It's not a sanctioned camp.
Little tiny home thing.
They say it's a sanctioned camp. A sanctioned camp is bring yourselves, bring your stuff, bring your tents. Mm-hmm. We will support you. We'll help you, take care of yourselves, provide you with, basic hygiene, all that stuff. And we'll give you a place to stay warm and stay alive, and then we'll provide you
and it
with
will
services.
be at a low enough cost
Yeah.
that we could easily do this at another place.
Yeah.
But again, they're like talking about well over $1 million for
Yep.
just the infrastructure. You don't need infrastructure. You need a fence.
Yep.
You need a security guard,
Yep.
and you need just very basic necessities.
My mom, who's a child of the Depression, is often talks about, why don't we have something like the work camps of the Depression? There were homeless people, lots and lots of them. The government said, here's a place you can come. There'll be opportunity for food, for shelter, for work. Come here, and this is the opportunity, because right now there's not. The opportunity is camp somewhere, hope they don't come across you and throw all your stuff away. You've heard the articles. There's people up in the foothills because they know that the abatements probably won't get up there.
We interviewed one of them.
Yeah. The one guy helped out. That's where he was. He had an encampment up in a hill, and he camouflaged it. And when it snowed, he was thankful for the snow because you couldn't see it at all. But then the snow caved in his tent, and then we had to go fix that.
There's some serious camps up there.
There's some serious camps.
We went up, and there was like a little home and roof and lazy boy recliner and TV and rigging.
Yeah.
It's all rigged up.
And it's, not to get too kind of like, it's like the most basic of a human right to be able to keep yourself alive.
Yeah, and so back to your point, why don't we have opportunities for homeless? Like, why not say, we got a camp, we're growing potatoes.
Yeah.
You could, I don't know, thin potatoes, because that's a thing.
Yeah.
Or harvest potatoes.
Sounds like a thing.
I don't know. You can thin beets. Like my grandpa used to do that.
Carrots,
during the
beets, all those
Depression.
ones.
So it's like, I know there's not a whole lot of manual labor jobs
Yeah.
anymore, but just something to keep people busy so that they're not thinking about how miserable their lives are, or that they didn't want to get their next fix or whatever.
Yeah, you'll hear psychologists talk about purpose, right? That we all need purpose. That's part of living a fulfilling life and feeling like you have worth and having dignity, that you have purpose. And I think that's part of what's wrapped up in the camping. So like, all right, it's like a survival purpose. You're like, I pull my resources together, find a place to camp, set up a camp, improve it. I can stay warm here. I know where to go to get food, St. Paul, wherever. And then this city comes in the county, and they take it all away. And they not only remove your camp, your purpose, your dignity, and you're like, now I have to start over. And like you said, to have to do that over and over and over again sounds like a quick way to go crazy.
Yeah, it's a bad situation, and I don't see it improving anytime soon.
I mean, I'd say I don't think Rocky or Aaron or Michael Valentine are perfect, right? They all have their flaws, and some of them we all see, right? And that people talk about. But when I sum it all up, like, yes, Mendenhall's done some good stuff, but the scales tip so heavy on the negative when I just include the abatements and that opportunity for the low end of society. It's not enough. And I understand why she says we have to have partners. But if seeking partners means nothing's ever happening, then it sounds like it's not the right decision. I would much rather have a very bad street. I gave her a hard time about potholes, some memes. And I'd rather drive on pothole-ridden streets and know that there's no abatements and those people have a camp to go to where services are provided. I think Rocky's more likely to make that happen than Aaron Mendenhall. So,
I agree.
I mean, they're the choices we have. And like I said, I think when you sum it up, there's more positive for Rocky being our next mayor than Mendenhall. So
yeah, well, the status quo is not working. So as long as somebody's willing to go in and actually maybe piss off some developers by relaxing
even if we make
codes.
somebody at the state mad, I'm like, it's okay.
Yeah,
it's okay to not
change. You never make an omelet without breaking eggs.
No.
So
yeah.
Well, Casey,
anyway,
thanks so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I loved it.
I appreciate it. Yeah. So thank you so much for watching. This presentation is all a part of our bigger initiative to tell the story and present the voices of the unsheltered in Salt Lake City. And it's not just the voices of the unsheltered. We were also talking to a lot of policy makers. We had Sim Gill on the program. We talked to a lot of NGOs. We had David DeRocher from the Other Side Academy. He's the CEO. That's a very effective organization, as is the In Between. We've had the CEO of that organization, Jillian Olmsted, on as well. And we are having a film premiere at Broovies November 2nd. It's a compilation of our efforts in covering this very important topic. And it's episode 1 of a 5-part series we're doing on homelessness. And we're selling tickets to that event. And you can go out to utahstories.com and buy your ticket now. They've been selling quick. And we've got a VIP option that includes a drink. So you can sit there and eat nachos, drink a beer, watch our 3 films we're going to be premiering. We're also showing a film about the gondola and a film about a young boy with a speech impediment overcoming that challenge. So it's going to be a really fun night. We've got a panel of guests, including Rocky Anderson, Carol Hollowell from Switchpoint. I think Michael Valentine is also coming, but it's going to be a really cool discussion about what are the best solutions to solving this homeless problem, especially before the winter comes. So we hope you will join us there. So thanks for watching. We will be back in about 10 minutes with our next segment.